Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is Sunday, 10:29. Hope everyone's doing good. It is March 15th already. Pretty nice day. Got pretty cold yesterday, which was Saturday. But nevertheless, this week I think is the first day of spring coming right up. So yeah, good times. We've had some super nice weather, pretty warm, and it's a good kind of relief. The winter does get to me after a while. I've learned to, I guess, enjoy winter more over the years than if you talk to me about the winter time about 8 to 10 years ago, I would have had nothing good to say about it. Sometimes I will say like winter can be cool or good for like projects that you're working on because there's more time. I mean, at least from a musician's standpoint, here where we live here in mid coast, it's pretty seasonal for gigs and work and things like that. So there's a lot of the times during winter there's a lot more downtime. So I've had a few winters where, as far as writing music, and then also like with some recording projects, it can be a really good time of year to kind of hunker down and get projects done that way. And I've done some pretty big recording projects in the past during the winter. It was like 2 3 years ago we did a bunch of recording for Quantum and had we recorded like two albums during the middle of winter. Also, this winter was pretty good, or going into the winter, first half of the winter, I was like writing a lot of new material for Quantum, which was cool. Also, did two recording projects this year and last year technically. We we started recording last year. It was probably about, I think we started it in like October, and then we finished it right around, I think it might have been in December for the most part, or around Thanksgiving, late November. We did most of the tracking with Osmia. We finished our first, well, actually, my first album with them. We recorded it all here at my place, which was really great. There was a great mobile studio that Eric Hemke, who plays in the band. He is a really great recording engineer. He has a really nice studio, but he's able to it's portable. He's able to move it, and it's mobile. He's able to move it around and set it up at different locations. So we had this idea over the fall, like after the summer was kind of winding down with some gigs and things and some committed shows. We had a pretty busy fall, and as the fall was kind of ending, we were like, okay, maybe we can get some time here to hunker down, do some recording, because it had been closing up on almost a year or so. So really, really, felt like it was a good time of the year to do it. And I think we had rehearsed a couple times here at my music studio, and then we were talking more about it, and then we decided to try recording here, and then we spent a day or two setting up here, getting everything situated, had a test run with the sound and the mic placement and just the room. Everybody was pretty happy with it, and this was like probably in September. And then we took a little bit of a break, had a few more shows, and then after about probably the second to last show that we had booked for the season, that following weekend or so, we started tracking, we started recording, and it took us probably, I don't know, maybe four big sessions to finish the recording, at least with getting all of the main parts done, like getting the drums done and all of the rhythm parts. So we finished that in about, I think it was after Thanksgiving. It's hard for me to remember exactly when, but it took us. We started recorded for a couple of weekends in a row. We were doing it on Sundays, I think, on Saturdays, and maybe even during the week. There were a few sessions during the week. We had to take a long break for a couple of reasons. I think Leo had hurt his hand, who plays guitar, and he's the main principal songwriter for Osmond. So he had, like, there was some kind of injury, I think, and then we had to take a break. And we took about, I don't know, maybe a month off, and then we came back to it and finished pretty much all of it. And then those guys, Eric and Leo, spent the last, handful of months just kind of doing some overdubs, some extra vocal tracks and things like that. And then we also, Eric had another idea, who was doing the recording, to maybe do some additional percussion, drum overdubs. So I went into the studio again a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe a little less, and we spent a day doing these various kind of drum percussion overdubs. And then I think that was that. And then they finished one of the first, I guess technically a single from the album, Disappeared, which we just put up, or they just put up on Bandcamp, and it's out now. And then the rest of the record will probably, it's hard to say when exactly. We don't have a definite release date, but I would say probably by the summer of this year it will be done. Or we're technically, this is spring season now, which is amazing. I think Friday of next week is technically the first day of spring. So I would imagine by the summer it will be done and out. So pretty excited. There's about, I'd say, 7 to 8 tracks on the record. Pretty excited with it. Well, everybody's pretty happy with the first single, Disappeared. Gotten some pretty good feedback from people around it, so pretty excited. Very very excited about you know seeing where this whole thing will go. Also, yesterday I did a big recording project. I've been working with this really cool woman, Jane Kersling, who has this alias, if you will, Cowboy Jane, and she has a pretty big social media presence on Instagram, on Facebook, mostly Instagram. But her and her husband are both filmmakers, really creative, really interesting, really smart, intelligent people. She had about, it was probably about, I think it was probably in like September or October of last year. She had approached me about doing this music project with her, where she was writing all of this music, and she was like putting together this band, and then she wanted to eventually get all of the material, put together, rehearsed, and then recorded as an album, and kind of this concept album. And I was really interested in it. So, and I had met Jane Kirksling a few years ago at, I think the first time I met her was at the All Roads Festival in Belfast a few years back. So, and then after that, I started running into her more and more at a few different gigs and things like that. And then she had come to actually an Osmia gig in the fall, and we talked a lot, hung out. Super cool lady, very talented. And I told her, and then from there she had asked me if I'd be interested in doing this recording project. so I was like, yeah, definitely. And she had sent me a couple of the songs, and I was like, yeah, this is cool material. It's all original material. And then probably it was like November of last year now, which is always trips me out saying that. But it was November last year, 2025. Here we are, 2026. We had our first rehearsal, band rehearsal, and it's a fairly big band. There's guitar, vocals. There's also two guitars, vocals, violin, trumpet, bass, a couple of different vocals. It's a fairly large band, and we started working on this material. And the music is really interesting. It's kind of like, it definitely has this kind of country vibe to it. It also has a real cinematic quality. She's really influenced by the films of and kind of the aesthetics of David Lynch. So a lot of her work has that kind of vibe, which is really great. And also, she's also really into like spaghetti westerns. So it's real interesting music. It's kind of weird. It's kind of dark. It's quirky, but there's a lot of cool melodies and it's got this whole. It's like I don't know. I kind of feel like it's a concept album, and she's also in the process, I think, of like directing and putting together videos to kind of accompany the music. So we started rehearsing in November, and then we got together maybe three, probably four other times over this. Like we'd get together a couple times a month and have these big rehearsals, like an all day rehearsal, like on a Sunday. And after the second or third rehearsal, I was like, okay, this is cool. I'm digging this. I'm into it. And I was really like, okay, this would be sweet. I'm digging this music. It has a real cool vibe. Obviously, a big attraction for me would be is the movie vibe, and that whole thing, and because I'm personally way into soundtracks, movies, of course, really influenced by movies, and I love the whole cinematic quality. Big fan of David Lynch is one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. I'm really into spaghetti westerns, Sergio Leone, Ennio Morricone. So just kind of a win-win situation, and I really, really, really enjoy putting time and effort into original material for people and artists and bands that in fairly in recent years, different bands that I've gotten a chance to play with, do some recording projects. I really get into putting together original material. I really, really love it. I have nothing against, cover bands and people who do covers. I've done, my past was, in my past, like up to about 10 years ago or a little bit less, was mostly, that was most of the work that I did of where I was playing in cover bands and doing pickup gigs, which I still do here and there. But back then, about 10 years ago or a little less, I was in a couple of bands that were more or less exclusively cover bands, and we had some good gigs and some pretty good, pretty we kind of got into a place of having some pretty good momentum and things like that. But I just am not, honestly, I'm just not really into doing covers anymore. I just feel like, you know, even if you have a band that is going to try to really replicate certain records or, certain artists, like, uh, whether it's, you know, a Pink Floyd record, which I was involved with a band that was really heavily involved with, like, kind of replicating or, performing Pink Floyd records and things like that. And obviously, you learn, and I learned a lot from a lot of that music because it's, I mean, the main thing is that technically you learn, and it's a lot of work. It's a big challenge to trying to really replicate a record, and so you do get, it does help your growth as a musician. But, I feel like ultimately it's kind of this dead end thing because it's never going to be as good as the original kind of source material. And the amount of time and effort that it takes to get it to a level where it's pretty good or pretty solid is a lot of work, a monumental amount of work, and that's great. And again, you do get better as a musician and as an artist, and you develop. You have to acquire a certain level, and it does help you. Hopefully become a better musician. But to me, it's like at the end of the day, it's like why try to play Pink Floyd's The Wall or Animals, classic albums, and try to replicate them when you can get them to a place of where they're good and they're good representations. But to me, even if you get it to an incredibly high level, I could just kind of feel like why? What's the point? It's never going to be as good as if you put on the original record, like case in point, The Wall or Animals. Like it's never going to be as good as that. So I rather like take all of that energy, which I had done that for a long time. I would rather take all of that energy and put that into original product and original tunes and the whole thing. So anyway, I was able to switch gears somewhat after that, and I still do some like sporadic projects that include covers or cover projects, if you will. I was in a band right up until I think it was last year that was primarily a cover band, and that band was pretty good. We had a lot of good gigs. That band is not together anymore, but so I still do it. And it's not that I poo poo people who do it because I understand it does require a lot of work, and it is in some ways, obviously for obvious reasons, financially it can be a little bit more of a payoff because you're going to be playing for audiences, that and they want to hear a certain record and there's like that, that built-in kind of audience, so but I'd rather do these other projects of where it's all original material because I feel it, whether it really connects with people or whether maybe it doesn't. I just feel like automatically for me as a just as a fan of music, when I see a person doing that and taking on this, monumental task of creating something from scratch, to me it automatically gives me like I have so much respect for that person. It's awesome. So getting back to the project with Jane Kersling, like we've been over the span of 4 or 5 months we were rehearsing, and we had a rehearsal the last I think it was a couple of weeks ago. About no, I'd say it was about a week ago or so. We had our last kind of band rehearsal for the most part. So, and originally we were going to record about, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, we were going to start recording. We had this whole, she had set up this whole schedule for the recording sessions, and there's a really nice studio in Belfast that she got connected with, and she put together all the logistics, and it was a lot for her to do because there's a lot of people in the band. It's a like 6 7 piece band. People are busy, so she was trying to coordinate all of that. She got it all set, and the whole plan was the three of us were going to go in, Jane, myself, and another musician who is the bass player in the project, who's also kind of the music director, who's really awesome. We were going to go in and try to lay down kind of the rhythm tracks, like try to focus on getting the drums and maybe some vocal guitar stuff and some bass tracks, but mainly trying to get the foundation set up for some of these tunes. And so she had, arranged this whole pretty big schedule of we blocked off, I think it was like 3 weeks, at least 2 full weekends some or two full weeks at one point where she was going. We were going to go in the studio like during the weekday night, and then go continue on the weekends, like a Saturday or Sunday, and try to get those done. And once those tracks were done with the drums and what have you, and other, maybe the guitar or vocal tracks, then she had the other members of the project. They were going to come in and then do the additional recording, but she had the idea of like, let's get that first, so we had all this scheduled and it was all kind of coming together. But then there was some, some kind of crazy scheduling conflicts, which happened. So then she decided to push everything up about, by a few weeks or, 3 weeks to a month. So she pushed it. She basically changed all the dates and pushed everything up. And then she decided to try to like set up the time for at least us again, which was yesterday, which was Saturday, to go into the studio and see what we could do. And originally we were going to go and try to record all day Saturday and then Sunday and then go from there. And it was funny because my dad is turning 90 this week, so it's his birthday. His birthday's on Friday, but they wanted to go out to dinner today for a Chinese buffet, which is awesome. They wanted to go out for dinner today, and then I told my mom, well, I can probably do it, but I'm not sure what time, and I might have to be in the studio for a good portion of the day today, which is Sunday. So I'm not sure. And then I thought, well, maybe maybe I could possibly get all the tracks done on Saturday and then I would be free. But they were going to go anyway out to dinner today, regardless. So I was like, "Don't hold up for me," but I'm going to see because I was committed to doing this project first. So I said, "Well, let me see how things go. I'm not. This is this has to be the priority right now." So we got together for the recording session yesterday on Saturday, like I guess early afternoon we started, and luckily, lo and behold, I got all my drum parts done all day yesterday. It was a pretty long day. We were there from about 12:45 till about 8:30. I was pretty tired at the end of it, but we got all the drum tracks done. As far as I know, everybody seemed pretty happy with it. I thought they it was a good session. So we got all the tracks done as far as I know. And if I need to get back into the studio, if I get a call back, then of course I'll do that. But it seems like things went pretty well. So we were able to get all the tracks done, which I was really surprised. And now I'm free today. So yeah. And getting back to the main topic at hand today, I went to the movies with a friend, and we went to we ended up going to Black Bear Cinema, which is awesome. We went to go see Friday 13th, the final chapter, part 4 on the big screen, and it was absolutely incredible. I'm going to do a video on the whole experience. Super awesome. A packed house. It was pretty much sold out. And again, that's the thing. One of the things I love about the classic 80s slasher movies, exploitation movies, is that they're kind of short. They're kind of short. They're not very long. I would say your average length as far as for even like a full-length feature for a lot of the movies that came out in the 70s and 80s when it comes to horror movies, exploitation movies, slasher movies in this case, hour and a half. It's hard you'd be hard pressed to find too many exploitation movies that are over 2 hours. I have a few movies in my collection that are a little bit longer, but for the most part, they're kind of one and done. They're pretty short. So it's pretty refreshing. I do kind of think some movies are a little bit too long these days, even though I personally, if the movie's good, I don't have any problems with length, at all. If I'm into it, I'm into it. And some movies, sometimes, as a fan of a film or a movie you're seeing for the first time, or even a movie that and in my case, a lot of the times that I own, I enjoy it so much that I kind of don't want it to end. So I'm totally fine with movies that are long, and I tend to like films that are, a little bit on the slower side. I love the slow burn kind of style or aesthetic to filmmaking or storytelling. But with all of your classic slasher movies, exploitation horror movies, they're, on average an hour and a half. And so we we got done. We got done. Friday 13th was over by. It started at 7 o'clock, and then it was over by 8:30. And we were up in Orono at Black Bear Cinema. It was super fun, and I'm going to do a show on it. Definitely do a show on the whole experience. It was the Friday 13th Part Four, or chap Friday 13th Part Four chapter. The final chapter is overall my favorite movie in the entire franchise. So it was kind of I don't know, a dream come true to see it on the big screen. It was awesome. It was so cool to see it packed, like it was sold out pretty much, and so super cool. Anyway, I was like, wait, holy shit, the movie's, and I have that movie. I have the final chapter pretty much memorized because I've seen it so many times. I had just watched it like last week again. So it's super funny, and I'm like, wait, realizing, oh shit, the movie's almost over, and I turn to my friend Kyle who went, and I'm like, man, this movie's gonna be over in a few minutes, and then the movie was done, and then we went out to the lobby, and I looked at the time, and I'm like, holy fuck, it's only 8:30. It's crazy. And granted, we went to Black Bear Cinema, which is a really cool theater. I've been recommending it to people as much as I can because it's really awesome. It's really worth. It's a little hike. It's an hour and 15 minutes from here in my place here in Northport. So some people would be turned off to driving an hour and 15 or hour and a half to go see a movie, and I get that. But for me, it's totally worth it because it's really a really nice theater. The people there. This was the third time I've been to this theater, and we got to talk to the the managers and the people that work there. They're all really cool people, really nice, and we got both times. The last time I was up there, we saw Friday 13th Part 3, which was amazing. And so going there again, we hung out with them and talked to the manager and the general manager. They're all really cool people. And the cool thing is that the reason I really dug talking to them was that they're really into movies. They're not just there as like it's just, their job, and they're just kind of working for a corporation or something, and they're just making money. But they're working there. I mean, it's their job, but they generally really love movies. Like the manager was there, and he's this pretty young guy. We were talking to him, and he was saying how he's this was like the second movie he was going to watch that he had seen. He in regards he was at the showing of Friday the 13th, and then he was going to stay later and watch his another movie, a brand new movie that had just come out, which is today's review for this new A24 horror film called Undertone. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to watch Undertone next. And I was like, wow, okay, that's impressive. And he was like, yeah, this is my third movie tonight, or third movie today. And I'm like, all right, totally into movies. And we're started talking about movies and all this shit. And so we were talking about that, and then I turned to Kyle and I'm like, man, it's so early. Do you want to go see it? And I just threw it out there. I was like, hey, do you want to, since it's only 8:30, do you want to watch another movie? Like, because the tickets were like $10, and I'm like, why the fuck not? Since we're here. And Friday 13th again, it was like an hour and a half. It was done. We were done. We were out standing in the lobby at 8:30 on a Friday night, and I'm like, man, I'm totally awake. I'm ready to go to see another movie or do something else. So he was like, yeah, maybe we'll do that. And then we decided to do it. So today's review is on this movie Undertone, which is a new A24 film that I had just heard about, and I saw it on Friday. I had heard about this movie, I think like Wednesday or Thursday. This movie kind of came out of nowhere for me. I was on YouTube watching some movie reviews like I usually do. A couple of the YouTube folks that I really love, the old YouTube folks that I regularly watch. Pizzowell is really great. I watch his stuff. I watch Cody Leach. I do watch Chris Stuckman every now and then. 42nd Street Forever and Mood 616. Those are like my go-to. But I mainly watch like those three or four. There's other people I watch. So I was just kind of checking out some videos. It was like on a Wednesday night or something, before I was going to bed. And then I came across this, in my feed on YouTube, I came across these reviews for this new movie Undertone that was just coming out that weekend, or I think was premiering this that Friday, was opening, and it got a national release, and it was a new A24 horror film. And some of the ads, or really all of the ads that I saw pop up in the headlines for this new movie, were these people were saying that this movie was utterly terrifying, one of the scariest movies ever made, and a little bit over the top, a little bit ridiculous, because that's kind of a fucking bold claim. So I skimmed through some of the reviews. I didn't really sit through them, but I just kind of got a general, kind of vibe of what some of these critics and YouTube folks were saying about the movie, and they really raved about it, saying that this movie was really unique, really different, really low budget, and that it was generally really, really scary. There were some reviews that actually said that this movie was one of the scariest movies ever made, easily the scariest movie of this year, and all these huge accolades. Basically, it was all like real positive things. And I saw about three or four reviews, and I'm like, okay. And it was a pretty low budget film, from what I gathered. It was a brand new movie, brand new release, and I saw that it was playing at Black Bear Cinema. So I was like, hey Kyle, do you want to go see that? And then he was like, and then I talked to him about it. I was like, I just heard about this movie, that it's supposed to be like legitimately scary, and it's A24. I like A24. I have this mixed thing. I don't know. I have this really mixed thing with A24. I kind of feel I'm starting to fall off the bandwagon a little bit with A24. But anyway, I mentioned it, and then we were like, okay, let's go see it. And I said to him, once we agreed on it, I was like, I think Undertone is also a pretty short movie. I think it's only an hour and a half. But I will say it felt longer than that, and I'll get into that. But and it was a pretty big, I guess you could say, contrast of an experience, like going to see Friday 13th. And again, granted, massive, I'd say probably when it comes to horror franchise movies, it's, obviously my favorite franchise of all time. Just franchise in general, but then a slasher franchise. And, massively popular. And it was an interesting contrast, like going to see that, like wicked old school, slasher movie, packed, packed audience. People were totally into it. It was fucking awesome. And then we went to go see Undertone, which was a brand new movie that just came out. It opened on Friday. I think we saw it, when we saw it, it was opening night. And there were probably six, maybe seven, maybe eight people in the theater. We sat right in the middle, and the rest of the folks sat way in the back. So it was kind of funny. But what a contrast. So, anyway, so Undertone is a brand new release, came out in 2026. It's kind of the first new horror film that I saw this year. It's a Canadian horror film directed by Ian Tosun, who is this is his first film that he has directed. This is his debut. It got some pretty big traction and notoriety because it played at a few different horror movie festivals over the summer, like in July and August. It got a real big buzz from when it premiered at Fantasia Film Festival. And again, this is a A24 release and production, so A24 is a pretty huge studio right now, and it's always funny when people regard it or call it the genre of films that A24 releases. They always refer to it as elevated horror, which is kind of stupid, but I'm starting to think that that is more and more of a thing, and it's actually more and more accurate, even though I think it's kind of a little bit silly and uber pretentious, that term. But I do think it's the more and more films that I see that A24, the films that they've been putting out more and more, I feel like that's kind of an accurate title. And I'll, get into that a little bit more. Tiny, tiny cast for this film. Basically, we only really see one actor in the entire film. And it's a micro budget film, so super, super cheaply made, which is cool. Like, they did a lot for a little. Nina Curry is in this film. Adam DeMarco, who is not even in camera, we just hear his voice. And then Nina Curran. The basic premise of this movie is it's centered on this girl who has this with a friend of hers. They have this horror podcast, and it's called Undertone. And so the basic premise is this one central character, this girl. She is, running this podcast with her friend Undertone, and it seems to be like it's a horror podcast where they cover all things paranormal, and they do shows on various claims that people have said, or certain places are haunted, or that they go into stories about people who claim to have had these paranormal experiences involving exorcism, possession, experiences with the ghosts, all things supernatural. And they basically take a lot of these stories, and I think they even have like interviewed people that have had these experiences and basically just take a deep dive into it. And her partner, the guy she is doing this podcast with, is kind of more or less a believer in all things paranormal. And her character is way more kind of, I guess, rooted in science and is way more skeptical. So they always try to like present those two, schools of thought throughout the show. And it's basically that. And then the main thing too around this movie is that, so it's mainly just her, the lead. She's doing this podcast, and the other character in the movie who doesn't speak at all is her mom, and she is basically taking care of her mom by herself in her house, and her mom is near death. She is bedridden. She's very sick, and she's like taking care of her. She doesn't. The mother has no speaking roles in the film. She is basically just a presence in the movie, and so it's about this girl having this podcast, and then it cuts between her doing her show, and then you see her trying to take care of her mom and how incredibly hard and stressful physically and emotionally it is. So the basic thing is they have this one episode of where her partner comes across, he gets this kind of mysterious email with all of these audio clips of this like supposed paranormal experience that this couple had gone through. And so what they do during the show is they listen to each of these emails that he has gotten that are, supposedly entailing some kind of supernatural occurrence. And they basically listen to these clips and analyze them and talk about them. And the interesting thing about this movie is that the whole movie is all audio driven. It's all from the POV of her main character. Everything from the sound of the computer, the way everything is from her perspective. With her putting on headphones, it's all sound driven. This whole movie is totally sound driven. So, I mean, in that regard, this movie is very unique. It's purely 90%, 95% of this whole film, of this horror film, it's it's an auditory experience. You're getting the POV experience from her perspective running this podcast. And so as they're listening to these clips and things start getting a little bit more weird and creepier with listening to these voices, these audio clips of her husband, and basically the audio clips are these clips that this couple had taken where some horrible tragedy eventually occurred to where their child was killed or was dead. Trying to find out what had happened through listening to these tapes, and allegedly there was some kind of supernatural, demon or deity that was responsible. And basically it's set up to where the husband is recording his wife in her sleep, and she starts like speaking in foreign dialects, almost appears to be possessed by some kind of demon and what have you. So it's all, again, everything. There isn't really a visual element to this movie. It's all the audio. From what this is how you're getting information, because it's basically her sitting at this table in this house, occasionally checking on her mom, and we're just hearing everything from her perspective, through this podcast kind of setup. And as they're going through these tapes, these audio tapes, and listening to them, there starts to be there are a series of events that happen to her and at the house that are quite creepy, and there seems to be a ghost or something, some kind of presence in the house, and it's all tied in with her mom and her, where she's essentially on her deathbed, and things just kind of unfold from there. And that's the kind of the basic premise of the whole story, and that's really what you get at the end of the day. The one thing, I guess, starting off, one thing I will say is, like, I saw that this movie was like on the shorter side. Lengthwise, I saw that it was like an hour and a half. I do think that this movie feels a little too long. I do feel like it drags a little bit. After we were done, I really enjoyed the experience. It was mainly going to the movies and seeing a double feature, and then coming off of Friday 13th, which I had a super big buzz from seeing it. And it was just super fun hanging out with my buddy and us just seeing two movies. Like, I had an awesome, awesome time. So I had a really good time watching the movie, but it was more of the experience. My friend who I was with, he seemed to really like the movie quite a bit, and I liked it, but I found myself having more and more issues with it. And it's been a few days here, it's Sunday, and I've thought about the movie more. I've actually read a couple of reviews. I typically don't read or see reviews for movies until after I've like seen the movie fully, but there are occasions where I don't do that. But generally, after I go to the movies and see a movie, in a theater, especially when it comes to like, new releases, that's usually the time of when I will really take a plunge and check out reviews on that movie. And I did that for this film, for Undertone. So one thing I would say is I felt like this movie, it felt longer than an hour and a half. It felt like it was a little too long. I thought the movie did drag. The one thing, other, I mean, I guess starting with some of the more positive things that I thought were kind of interesting about this movie. I liked that it was the sound design for this movie is really good. I thought it's really because again the whole experience, it's all about the sound. That's kind of the selling point for this movie. Because it's from this character, this girl's perspective, through this podcast that she's running. So the whole movie, it's all visually. There's nothing really going on, and I'll get into that too. Visually, there really isn't anything going on. There really isn't anything exciting, but the audio experience is what this movie's about. The sound design, I would say that the filmmakers put in put all of their focus without a doubt in more so in the audio mix of this movie, probably more than any other aspect of this movie. And so I will say, like, for seeing new horror films, it definitely makes this film stand out. It's a pretty unique experience that way, and the audio is really good. After a while, it gets a little bit redundant and it's a little bit grating, and it's kind of the same. It feels like there's certain things that are kind of repeated over and over again, and there are times of where, and maybe that's what the filmmakers are going for, where it does feel disorienting and it is a little bit grating and it does feel like it's kind of overwhelming. And maybe that's what they're going for, probably, but it was a little bit hard to enjoy after a while because it's very cool. The sound design is really cool. Everything is mixed super well. The panning, all of the sounds, the kind of the Doppler effect. And easily that was the first thing I thought was, okay, they put all of their money and effort mainly into creating that kind of experience. But by the last, act of the film, the last two acts of this film, I felt like it was a little bit, I don't know, maybe annoying or just it was too it was too much. Like it was starting to get to me. It was starting to bother me. Not like that it was, not because it was like scaring me, but it just felt like it was like, I don't know, hurting my ears or something. Like it was really loud, and it just felt like it was kind of they were they were kind of doing the same, using the same tricks, if you will, and it just got a little bit too much and a little bit too too intense, maybe got a little too intense, but not necessarily in a cool way. I don't know, but I thought the concept and the way the film was told and that kind of perspective that we were seeing was definitely unique, and I thought generally that part of it was very, very cool. Hadn't really I don't haven't really experienced a film like this before, where that is the selling point. Even the whole marketing campaign for this film, again, that was put out, and it's been, it's a A24 movie. Even in their main campaign ad, they're saying this is the scariest movie you will ever hear. So that's what they're doing, which I get. And I thought the lead actress in this film, um, this was Ian Tusson's first film. For a debut film, I would say he's off to a pretty good start. I'd be curious to see what else he could do. I mean, pretty creative in a lot of ways, especially again with what I've been talking about. Um, I thought the acting by Nina Curry was pretty good, pretty solid. I had never seen her before. Again, she is really essentially she is the only actor in the entire movie, and it's just her sitting at a table in this house. That's what you see. And again, the other characters are all out off camera. Her partner is in the film, but we are only hearing his voice through the podcast. And so that's really it. And then the mother is somebody who does not speak, and there's no dialogue at all. And when these creepy things start happening, as she's like, as we're listening to these tapes of this alleged kind of, I don't know, paranormal experience that this couple had, when we're listening to that audio, it's pretty cool. It does get creepy, and there are moments in this film where it's pretty creepy, and then things start kind of spilling over or spilling out for her, where she starts experiencing, you know, feeling that there's a presence, where there's lights being turned on in her house, there's doors being closed, and then eventually she has this one encounter where she sees her mom kind of standing in the corner, which is kind of very much, well, a ripoff of the classic kind of, last scene that we see in the Blair Witch Project. Where the main character's like, one of the main characters is like, has his back and he's facing the corner. Very creepy scene, incredibly scary scene in that film. They kind of do that exact thing in this movie. So, but I will say this movie has some generally has some pretty creepy moments at times. Um, with doors being closed slowly, we get these little glimpses of some kind of shape or entity in the house. A couple of scenes with her mom kind of standing there in these darkened rooms that are pretty creepy, and she is, you know, experiencing something that is kind of overtaking the house and overtaking her. And we learn, and then we find out that it's this basically a demon that has come and is, you know, more or less, I guess, possessing her mom. So, but I will say a lot of those, they're not like jump scares. They're more of these, quick little scenes, and they're trying to create this atmosphere. And at first, some of those scenes are generally creepy, with the lights. You hear the water running, but she knows that her mom is in bed. She can't get out of bed. So how is this happening? So there's a series of these events that, at first, are kind of creepy, and I did kind of get goosebumps because I'm like, okay, it's the film is a slow burn. It's a slow movie, which I do love, kind of slow burn films, and it does have that. It does when it starts getting to the kind of the supernatural aspect of the film. It is pretty creepy, and there are moments of where you're like, okay, this is kind of creepy. I'm kind of into this. I can see this getting scarier and scarier potentially. But then after a while, I felt like the film just, as far as that aspect of it, it kind of stalled a little bit. It felt like it had like five or six things that it was doing as far as introducing the supernatural element into the movie, of where she was experiencing things that were not normal. It had about maybe four or five good scenes around that, and then I felt like after that it kind of stalled, and what they started to do was just kind of repeat those exact same scenes, like kind of over and over again, with no real payoff. They didn't really go anywhere. It was just kind of like, it just felt like it was this cycle, repeat and rinse kind of, cycle. They were just kind of repeating themselves, and it felt like it was losing. It just wasn't as creepy or scary or potentially as scary anymore, because they just kept repeating the same scenes, and they didn't really go anywhere. They didn't really lead to anything. So, and that was, going into the movie, well, probably at the, maybe the 40-minute, 50-minute mark of the film where I felt like they were kind of repeating themselves over and over again. And it was a little bit, uh, I felt like it didn't keep up that momentum anymore. The horror element, and the horror momentum, especially around the supernatural element. And again, one of the things after this is why I don't do reviews, like I don't do out of the theater reaction videos for movies, because I do think I firmly believe like your gut reaction is really kind of the telltale sign, or really it really says where you're at as far as whether you had a good experience or not. Like, for the most part, I think that usually really says it all. But it does change. I find it does change. Like, it definitely has changed a lot for this movie, where I initially had a good time, but then I started thinking about the movie more and more, and now it's been a few days, and I do think that this movie all overall was pretty decent, pretty good, I guess. But I found myself thinking about the movie and feeling like I needed more, and I saw a lot of things that just didn't make sense, and what have you. And over the last few days, and today's Sunday, and I saw it Friday night. I been waking up and thinking about the movie and finding more and more things that I'm like, I'm kind of at odds with. So it has changed quite a bit. It is a thought provoking movie, which I think is really cool because I am still thinking about it, and I have been talking to friends about it, which is good. So, in that regard, that's a good experience. I think when you have that and you're still thinking about it, whether it was a good experience or a bad experience. And I wouldn't say it was a bad experience, but just had a lot of issues with it, or find myself now having issues with it. And so, the other one of the other aspects of the movie, which I think started out as a really cool thing, but then I felt like it became a problem for this movie, was that there's no other actors in the movie. There's no other actors in the film getting any kind of screen time. And I thought that at first that was a really cool thing. But then I felt again like the kind of the supernatural, the spooky kind of elements that this character is experiencing, while they're listening to these tapes over time. It just kind of repeated the same things after a while, and it was nothing new. It didn't really have any payoff. I felt this movie ultimately kind of started to suffer around the same time, maybe midway through the film. I felt like it started suffering, because it just didn't. There were no other actors. There were no other. Like, I felt like it couldn't carry itself for the entire duration with just having one central character and just her perspective. I think it needed other actors to be involved to give a little bit more of a richness to the story, or to give the story more depth to it, because the story itself, if you look at the story, like just stripping it way down, it's super simple, like incredibly simple and super straightforward. I mean, you look at it for what it is. It's like a girl who runs a podcast and listens to these tapes, and their show is about paranormal experiences. They listen to these tapes of these claims of people who have had these experiences, and she then experiences weird shit. The end. Like, that's pretty simple. A 12-year-old could come up with that. And that's not inherently wrong, but it's like what you take, some of the great films of our time are very simple stories, but they tell it in a really interesting way. They do something really unique, and what have you. They give a new kind of perspective. And this movie does have that new perspective as far as the audio goes. But ultimately, I felt like it fell short. And so by the midway mark, I felt like this movie suffered because initially, from the strength of just seeing one character, and just experiencing what she's experiencing. I felt like I needed to see more. I needed to have other characters on the screen. I need I needed some more meat on the bones for this movie for me to be, really engaging. And I felt like at that point it was like, oh, okay, this is kind of getting redundant. And the other thing, the one thing, and this was I'd say both of those things are happening to me about, I would say around the midway mark, maybe 45, 50 minutes into the movie. I was like, okay, this is getting a bit much right now. The other thing, the one thing I did not like about this movie that actually drove me crazy and I found it super annoying, even when I saw it Friday night, I was like, okay, how many of these scenes are we going to see? The thing that I did not like about this movie was the overuse of religious symbolism. I was just like, oh my fucking god, how many more times are we going to see a picture or a painting of a Catholic saint or another picture of a cross? Like, how many times are we going to see this? And it was like every fucking scene had some kind of religious icon. And because the main thing around that is this girl's mother is very very religious, Catholic, and very 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 steeped in her religion. So there's all of this constant barrage of religious symbolism that is like, it's overkill. There's so much of it. Again, it's one of those things when they introduce and show some of these pictures of these like religious icons, and you get a, and then these various kinds of crosses that they have in the production, that you see in this house. It's cool. I liked it, and it was creepy, and it created this cool atmosphere. But then it's like every fucking scene there's some kind of religious symbolism, and it's overly used. And I'm like, I literally was like saying to myself, and I'm like, if I see another picture or painting of a fucking cross or Christian saint, I'm gonna scream. And there was so much of that was one thing that just drove me crazy. And I'm like, why would you? I felt like this movie took problem had a hard time navigating with like taking something that was cool and unique, but then it felt like, and using it effectively, but then it just took those same things and put them in this repeat cycle, and you were just seeing those things that initially were strengths of the film, but then they just repeated them over and over again to where everything that those things initially established lost all of its effect. And the thing that did annoy me that I did not like was the overuse of religious symbolism, where it was just like, come on, like how many times? It's like, okay, I get it, I get it, I get it, I get it. And I just was like, this is ridiculous. Why are they relying on this so much? At first, it worked, but then it was overused. Yeah, I did not like that part of it. I did not like that part of it. And um, I thought too, when they kind of introduced this kind of demon character that's in the movie that eventually becomes a part of the movie, I thought that was so damn. All of those aspects of when they introduced this kind of demon that is more or less coming into the story was so ridiculously cheesy and so cliche. Oh, like it was so ham-handed, and it was so predictable, so stereotypical. I did not buy it at all, and it wasn't scary to me. It was just like, okay, where they would use this voice that you hear on the tapes, or and it's because it's all audio driven, and it's like this typical kind of demon voice, and this whole like, just something we've seen a billion times when it comes to horror films that have this character, of where we're kind of getting introduced to this demon or entity, and it was just like, come on, this is something we've seen so many times, and I'm like, oh, And I'm like, why did they take the easy way out? Why did they make this so cheesy, but not in a good way? I didn't understand the logic. They kept repeating those things, over and over again. And you know, and the movie has a very kind of ambiguous ending, which I kind of thought was kind of cool. But again, I thought this movie really takes a few elements and totally steals a few elements from Blair Witch Project, the first one, which I think is still a horror masterpiece. I think that movie is still fantastic, and still holds up. And I think this movie took a few elements from that movie big time, and especially with the ending, where it was like, oh come on, like clearly you could not find an exit strategy, an original exit strategy for how to conclude this story, and it was like totally, it was a total Blair Witch ripoff. So to kind of conclude, you know, and it's a thing that happens. I think it happens a lot in this day and age, probably too much. But I'd say this movie is so overly hyped. Again, there's things about this movie that I thought were really interesting. I really love the audio thing, the audio aspect, because that's like essentially the whole way the story is told. But ultimately, it defeats itself. Um, I do think that this movie is so overly hyped. This is not the scariest movie ever made. I don't get why. I don't get that at all. Like, I can think of 4 or 5 movies right off the top of my head without even thinking about it that are I feel, at least for my money, legitimately scarier than this film. Lake Mungo. That movie I think is one of the scariest movies ever made. The Australian film, amazing film. I think Sinister with Ethan Hawke, super scary movie. Even the first Conjuring, really scary film. Babadook, The Witch is scarier. I mean, and these are all like contemporary horror films, or more or less, in recent time. So I don't. Yeah, it's overly hyped. I think it's good, but it's a mixed bag, and I ultimately wouldn't. I wouldn't go see this in the theater again. I, I think it's a unique experience. Uh, but ultimately, it like, it's too redundant, and it's the same. They introduce these things of how to tell a story and concepts, but then they just kind of milk it, and it's you just see the same thing over and over again. So I don't know. I would probably pass on this movie. It's not a terrible movie. It's not a bad movie, but it needed a lot more for me. And again, this main reason I don't do out of the theater reaction videos, because I like to sit with movies for a while. My buddy who I went to see the movie with, I don't know what he's feeling about the movie now, but he loved it. He thought it was one of the scariest movies he'd seen this year. He felt it was one of the best movies he saw this year. So I don't know. But anyway, this concludes my talker slash review on Undertone. Undertone. And well, one other thing. When I said at the beginning of the top of the video, where A24 has this weird label that I believe that they kind of probably invented themselves, of where they refer most of the movies they put out. They do other styles, I think, but most of the films that they are involved in are horror based, and so they get this label, and I think that they more or less created it themselves. But this whole thing of like elevated, horror, of where these are art house horror films, like horror films that have a certain kind of intellectualism to them, or that are artfully done and have this kind of European aesthetic behind them. And I just feel like, oh god, that's so I just feel like that's so boring and pretentious. It's like, I want to go and just experience, have a good experience. That's all I'm asking for. I don't care what the budget is. I don't care what the, what if the if this is a first time director or he's done 10 movies. I don't really care. Like, whatever. I just want to have the experience. And it's not about, like, I think when you go to the movies and go to the theater and see a movie, whether you're home at your house or you're at the theater, it's not an intellectual thing. I mean, yeah, movies are going to probably, you're going to have, movies are going to be, some movies are going to be really provocative, and some movies are going to make you think, which is cool. Make thinking is a good thing. It doesn't seem to happen in this fucking day and age, but thinking is a good thing. So, but your experience with a film, whether you're watching it at home or you're going to a theater, it's it's a communal thing. But then it's, well, especially in the theater, but it's a I feel like it's a primal thing. You're reacting physically to a movie, and then emotionally to a movie. You're not sitting there with this, intellectual preset, of how it's going to be. You're reacting to it, and it's not, you're not, you can't, if you go to a film with a preconceived, thing of how you feel a thing is going to be or how that experience is going to be, as opposed to just like going into it with an open mind and experiencing it. That's going to hinder your experience. And that's a normal thing. But if you go in as just like a kind of an empty vessel and just experience it, it's a primal thing. It's gonna resonate with you or not. And it's not a place to kind of intellectualize. I think the real world, like the crappy, kind of shitty real world that we live in most of the time, that's the crappy, shitty world that we unfortunately have to think about a lot. But in the theater, the film going experience, it's escaping from that, and I don't feel like that is an intellectual. If you're intellectualizing at that stage, it's going to hinder the experience. But anyway, I do feel the other thing that I can't stand is, and this is the reason. This is one of the reasons I was starting to say in the beginning of the show why I feel like I'm losing. I hate using this word or saying this word, but I'm losing faith in A24. I feel like their movies are just getting way too pretentious. And I want a movie that they put out that has some kind of levity, that where they're not like taking themselves so goddamn seriously. Like the last film that I saw that was A24 was I Stare at the TV Glow, and that movie was one of the most pretentious pools of hogwash I've ever seen. And again, had some very cool ideas. In some ways, it was well, like beautifully shot. It had some real interesting ideas. It was unique, but then it was redundant, and it just kind of repeated the same thing. And I just felt like it's too. There's no levity. There's no, like, just come on, folks. Like, people just lighten up a little bit. Like, you're taking yourself so damn serious. Everything is so serious, and everything is meant to be taken in this literal sense. And that's one thing I didn't enjoy about this movie, is that it's so serious. And I know it's a different film, different style of filmmaking, but coming out of Friday the 13th, where going to that movie, I felt like I went to this really cool party where I didn't want it to end because I was having such a fucking blast. And this movie is like kind of a Debbie Downer, and you're like, oh man, come on, like have some kind of levity to the story, because the whole movie is kind of stark and dark and depressing. And I feel like that's the thing that really hinders A24, is that they come across as really pretentious, but then there's no levity. There's no, everything's got to be serious, and it's all got to be this, like, this incredible heavy use of, metaphor and symbolism, and there's like this armchair, where you're picturing this like armchair intellectual with his pipe, and he's like pontificating about the ways of the world, and it's like, come on, it's just such pretentious garbage. Like, take chill out. And that's why I love fucking exploitation movies so much, because it's not about that at all. But anyway, yeah, this concludes my video. Have a great day. And Undertone 2026. Meh. Peace.